All right. Here I have four or two groups. One that we might call classes of goods, and one we might call types of goods. A class of goods is based on sort of a matrix of two factors. Right? There's a factor known as excludability and a factor known as rivalry. Okay, you all familiar with these? Sort of. Okay. Yeah, economics. All right. So excludability is the ability to control the access to the good. Well, let's back up. What's a good? A good can be anything that is desired for by people. It can be a natural resource. So natural resources can be goods. What do you make with natural? What kinds of what's the name of the terms that are typically associated? The term that is typically associated with a processed form of a natural resource. Let's say the natural resource is timber, trees in the forest. What would be the commodity version of the processed trees in the forest?
Paper.
Paper, yeah. In Oklahoma, it's pretty much paper, right?
Thanks.
Or lumber, right? Sawn lumber, paper pulp, something like that. Those are the commodities, right? The commodity is, in terms of natural resources, typically the processed form of the natural resource. So, in California, they're about to have a pork crisis, all right? And kind of grinning. But anyway, the pork crisis in California involves what? Pigs, right? So, is a pig a resource?
No.
Nah. Pig,
Well, yeah.
huh?
I mean, sure it is.
A pig is a resource?
Sure. I mean, you can.
A natural resource.
I mean, it's an animal.
Okay. It's an animal, but it's a natural resource. It's an agricultural resource, perhaps. All right. But the pig wouldn't survive. Well, take that back. The pig would survive in the wild. The dairy cow would probably not survive in the wild. Domesticated livestock. Okay. Generally, a natural resource is something that nature provides, and I'm taking your challenge of the term here. I like that. The nature of the natural resource is something we usually find in nature all by itself. It would exist without human beings. Maybe not as a natural resource, but it would exist. Right? Pigs, dairy cattle, horses, whatever. No, not horses. But certainly domesticated, Poland pigs and Jersey dairy cows. Those are creations of human ingenuity and human activity. Okay? So it's an interesting question. Your textbook actually says, livestock are a resource. I'm just begging to differ. It's just, well, certainly, what do those animals require? They require feed. That's a commodity, right? The resource would be to grow the feed, to grow the commodity. Let's say it's corn, maize. So corn is that a resource? Well, it's an agricultural product. Yeah, the seed would be a commodity. Okay? What would be the resource that you must have for corn?
Soil.
Water.
Soil, water. There's another one.
Sunlight.
You can't grow corn in your closet.
Sunlight.
Sunlight. Thank you so much. Okay. So, and if we get more specific, what do you need with the soil? What's the soil need to have? There are 18 million types of soil.
Phosphorus, nitrogen, carbon,
Okay, lots of mineral nutrients, lots of, what else? We have nitrogen and a lot of probably also bacteria, right? Soil is alive. You're going to have to also have maybe a structure, a good structure to the soil, which might be based on the geology or the base material of the soil. So soils are very, very complex, and we can talk probably about soils as resources because they exist in nature, but we don't farm on every type of soil because every type of soil is different. Okay, so the good, going back to this idea of goods, a good can be a natural resource, or it can be a commodity, or it can be a manufactured product. Okay, a good could be, what do you call these things? A power source or something? Power supply, that's what they call them, yeah. Pretty nifty little gadget. It's just a big battery, right? And the nice thing about this is you don't have to plug things in. So you can just carry your source around with you. So that's a manufactured product, very high tech. The iPad's high tech, but it's still good. It's still something that people might want. Shoes, that sort of thing. Okay, so just keep that in mind. We're not really talking about natural resources here, but we will. Which kind of leads into it. The idea of an excludable good is one where the access to it, by access we'll say possession, right? The possession and the use of the good is going to be dependent on typically a price, typically a payment, okay, to the owner, to the property owner. So an excludable good is just the condition in which access to a good or service by consumers who do not pay for it can be prevented, okay, from using it. So the way that you know how you can get the good, you can pay for it and exchange your dollars for the Big Mac or your dollars for the service at the garage, right, to repair your car. So good can also be a service. That makes sense. That's kind of weird because we always say goods and services, but a good can also be a service. So that's an excludable good. What's a non-excludable good? Something which you don't have to pay for in order to use it, like fresh air. This doesn't apply so much in Oklahoma because we have so many turnpikes, but public roads and things like knowledge. What are some other non-excludable goods? Think hard. Let's get 5 other non-excludable goods. Besides fresh air. Okay, maybe 3.
Free Wi-Fi.
Well, the last lake I went to was Tin Killer, and to use that lake, I had to pay for parking.
Have a friend with a house nearby.
Well, okay, yeah, it's possible, but not so much around Tin Killer. It's all
Free Wi-Fi.
Free Wi-Fi, great. Yeah, that's a good one. Free Wi-Fi.
Libraries? Like a public library?
Yeah, most of the time things like, well, any sort of thing that's put out there and provided so the public can use it. A library. Good. A park. Good. Most of the time parks are open for everybody, right? Okay, good. So the non-excludable good is just something that you don't have to pay for to use. Okay, next concept. Rivalry. And this is obvious. It'll seem obvious to you in a second. A rival good is one in which if you use it, nobody else can use it, at least at that moment. All right? So if you possess it, then it diminishes, that's the definition, it diminishes the ability for someone else to use it. And like in a hammer, what this means is it doesn't mean you can't lend a hammer to somebody, but only one person gets to use a hammer at a time. All right? So parking space, you can't wear somebody's underwear at the same. I guess probably not anyway. You don't want to go there. Chewing gum, well, okay, some people share it. You don't generally do that. A cup of coffee, is a good example. So, and so then we have the non-rival goods. So non-rival, non-rival is something that you can use at the same time, and multiple people can use the same thing at the same time, and basically it doesn't. Your use of the good doesn't diminish the ability of others to use it. Now, Wi-Fi, I don't know if everybody's using Wi-Fi in this building right now, does that diminish its speed? Okay, that might be kind of iffy there.
AC. AC.
Air conditioning, that's a great one. Yeah, that's very good. Well, the examples that are given here is like religion. You can consume religion, but everybody else, that doesn't diminish the consumability of religion by other people. National defense, whether you want it or not, you've got it. Okay? Everybody gets national defense, and then democracy, if you want that. If you want to imagine that. So non-rival goods, basically, just to understand it, it's something that can be utilized. All right, so let's move on. So these really don't matter so much until we begin to look at some. Well, I want you to understand what each one of these are. Okay, but it's when we start making combinations of these that it gets really interesting. So private goods can be of. I guess I stuttered when I type as well as when I talk. Private goods are excludable and rival. So, T-shirt, you can't use it. Not more than one person can use it at the same time, and it's going to cost you something. Then we have public goods, which are basically anybody can use them, and people are not in competition for them. You mentioned parks, national defense. Here are some interesting ones. Club goods. They're not rival, but they are excluded. You got to pay for it, but once you pay for it, you can share it with your friends. Netflix account. Yeah. So all that stuff. Well, I think that they're coming down on that, right? How many people can you share your Netflix account with? 5 or 6, something like that. Okay. Can you share your Apple Music account? You can? You can't share that? If somebody has an identical account, Apple account, okay. No, that's right. They have the family deal. Yeah, that's actually part of it. How about Spotify? Can you share a Spotify account?
You can't
Oh,
play music at the same time.
they allow you to share. Okay. I'm thinking pirate. What can you? I'm thinking illegal here, or not really illegal, but going against what they want. Okay. So anyway, common goods are the ones that we really want to be cognizant of, because those are rival and they're non-excludable. You can't keep anybody out from using them generally. They're rival in that only one person can use them at a time. So rival and non-excludable are what we call common goods, there are other terms that people use sometimes. Anybody heard of the different type of good? Sometimes called, well, anyway, it doesn't matter. Common goods. And so these have also a limited supply, and they're essentially free. So that means they're all going fast, right? They're going to last as long as people are after them. Think of some examples like that.
Toilet paper during COVID.
Toilet paper, yeah, exactly right. Yeah, so I mean, people stocked up, right? Is that why that happened? People stocked up on toilet paper, and then all the stores had no toilet paper, and so there was a toilet paper shortage supposedly. What? It's not free. That's right. Oh, good. Thanks. The toilet paper is not free. Well, unless you go to the public restroom. Okay, so that doesn't count. Thanks. Y'all are smart. Really sharp.
I guess maybe not anymore, but like a long time ago, just like land. You know, it's there, go take it.
What about the good fishing spots?
Hey. Or just fish in general. Right?
You still have to have a license in most places, but beyond that.
Where do you not have to have a license?
I think every state requires you to have a license, but if you're on private property for fishing, you don't have to. If you're hunting, you do. I want to say, like native lands, like this.
It's a trick question.
I'm in classes that deal with this. I'm gonna answer.
Okay. Are you in any marine biology classes?
I'm in like ichthyology and fish tech.
Well, once you get beyond 200 miles of the coastline, that's international waters. There is no authority there, unless there has been some authority created.
I mean, there are a lot of like almost pacts between
Yeah,
things.
yeah,
You
yeah.
never know
We'll
what-
talk about that. Good. New Zealand. So, what we're trying to get at is, theoretically, on the high seas, fishermen, fishing vessels that are going after things like bluefin tuna. They're not going to be regulated by any particular country. So, in theory, anything goes. And there are agreements, there are international agreements where portions of ocean have been designated with things like quotas. But not everybody is subject. The problem with that, of course, is it's very difficult to enforce, very expensive to enforce, and oftentimes people get away with breaking the rules.
So is it the tragedy of the commons, I think it's called?
Yes.
And about the unsustainability of common goods?
Exactly. That was my next point. Very good. So, common goods are those that are rival and non-excludable, and it leads to, particularly with natural resources, it leads to this problem that is referred to as the tragedy of the commons, tragedy of the common goods. So, what is the tragedy of the commons?
What's that mean?
Well, I mean, if someone puts out a bunch of free coffee on the table and then everyone takes the coffee, they drink it, and they come back and there's no coffee, that's the tragedy.
Okay, all right.
And then I think they touched on it earlier, but land use, when tragedy of the commons came out, is about overgrazing. Kind of before like the BLM and the implementation of like public land management, people could just graze wherever they wanted, and it was free but also rival. Like if you didn't get there, it was going to be gone.
Exactly. Yeah. And then what happened? So that's great, fantastic. And you're referring to the land policies that the Bureau of Land Management had in western states that basically opened up grazing lands to ranchers. There was a little tiny fee, but that fee was nowhere close to what they would actually have to pay if they had to pay for grazing. So in a sense, what's going on here is the price has been artificially lowered. Okay? Subsidization will cause this problem sometimes. And so we'll get into things like externalities later. But the tragedy of the commons, very good. The tragedy of the commons is this idea that you have first come, first served, and that then is detrimental to the resource itself. Oftentimes detrimental to the point that it's not recoverable. Okay? Now, if that happens, what kind of feedback loop has taken place? A positive feedback loop. So it's possible to actually overgraze areas and damage them enough so that, and this, I see this in Oklahoma all the time. I'm not saying it can't be fixed, it can, but it probably won't be fixed because of the expense involved. There's on the way to Tulsa on the Cimarron Turnpike, there's a farm on the south side of the highway where far too many livestock have been grazing on this pasture, and it's like you go along and there's tall grass and everything, and then you come to this pasture and it's like everything's cropped down to the ground. And of course, over time, what does that do? It changes the vegetation pattern because the types of grasses and weeds that are going to be exploiting that are going to be the ones that can survive it. So it changes often it changes it for the worse in terms of the original use of the resource for grazing. What are some other ways that, so that's, basically the tragedy of the commons. Or sorry. Is there any other example you can think of? Yeah.
Like a public beach, people going on paper trash there.
Public beach?
Yeah, people just leaving trash on the beach.
That's right. That to me, this is. I don't fish for tuna. I have caught tuna, yellowfin, not bluefin. But to me, I see the tragedy of the commons in public spaces. Public restrooms. I've taught here at OSU since '95, but the job I had before this was at a little regional school. We won't say what state. It wasn't Oklahoma, and it was the place was really nice, but I would go into the building every day, and there would just be garbage laying around, and it's like, man, why don't people clean up after themselves? But it never got real clean. It was sort of just people didn't care. It was a common space, and it wasn't theirs. So what? How many of you have a roommate? And I guess what I should say, how many of you have? I don't want to ask you where you live, but how many of you have an apartment or something like that where you have a place to cook?
More than just living.
More than just living in the old style Wilhelm apartments or whatever they're heard on. Okay, so if you have something like you can cook, that means you can dirty dishes. Or you have a bathroom that somebody's got to clean, right? You ever had any experience where the roommate that you have doesn't have the same standards that you have in terms of cleanliness? Or maybe you're the person who has the lower standards, and everybody, the other person has, seemingly higher standards. There's a conflict that takes place there. I once had the first year I taught this class, I had this idea to sort of explore the idea of the tragedy of the commons. How do you, and I love the public space thing. How could you possibly resolve the issue of people throwing their Sonic cups out the window and allowing garbage to blow all over the place at the park? And personally, I go around Boomer Lake most days, okay? And Boomer Lake is near and dear to my heart, but it's also sometimes a trashed out area, you know? How could that be fixed? Well, I had this idea the first year I taught this class. I was going to assign each student a little sector of Boomer Lake. Okay? And this, we would say, this is yours. You steward it. Okay? And that was just way too off the wall. It would have never worked. But the idea was that, I was going to ask the students to sort of kind of keep track of all the crap that gets thrown into their space and to clean it up. And to tell me how you feel after keeping that place picked up. It's public space, but you're going to say you are responsible for it. How do you feel after a semester of picking up stuff that other people have dropped? How do you feel about that place? How do you think you probably would feel? What? Mad, right? It's like you get angry. This is mine, and I'm responsible for it, and you all are just doing, pointless littering of this. So, the sense of that, or the whole idea, was that to allow you all to have a sense of ownership, a sense of private ownership. With private ownership, you tend to have, the feeling that you should steward this. All right. So anyway, I'll get away from that. We've actually gone a lot farther than I intended to today, and I congratulate you all. You're fantastic for doing that. Read up on the history of the conservation movement in those 3 chapters that I assigned, and I'll also I've got some notes that I'll drop into that same lesson. Okay? So I will see you on Thursday.